half an hour well spent. And thanks to Jeffrey for that, because I do like to jump into a live intersection and have those discussions, because really with the safe system assessments, we want you to be able to go out to any intersection in New Zealand or around the world, really, and be able to just utilize that thinking of exposure, likelihood, severity, thinking about all road users, thinking about cars, trucks, pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, and others. I mean, we're talking about public transport, e-scooters, e-bikes, whatever, exciting new micromobility comes along next. We can factor all of these things in with this structured risk assessment methodology that we call the Safe System Assessment Framework, that really has integrated those safe system principles into it. So, Gordon and Thomas, thank you there, Jeanette. Well done. Okay, so let's jump into a little bit of content for today, but keep your question coming in or your comments, and how am I going to go here? How are we looking there, Kathy?
Yep, very good.
Thank you. All right, so this is sort of the third module is the one to just give us the final launch pad into the detailed mechanics of undertaking that safe system assessment. So next session, we really will go through, how do you fill out the matrix? How do you score things? What do you write where? How do we fill this out? How do we multiply this and that sort of stuff? Okay. This one's the final one, sort of more at that principle level in helping think about exposure, likelihood, severity, contextualizing stuff for vulnerable road users, and helping us come up with some recommendations that we can put in our safe system assessment reports to really help projects consider the road safety needs of vulnerable road users, being pedestrians, motorcyclists, and cyclists. Hit the record button, and yeah, as I mentioned there, I really think there was some great analysis, road safety analysis of intersections in the assignments that have been marked, and a few still to come. Not many still to come, but a few still to come. So if you're in that category, get it in. As I say, most people generally pretty good with likelihood. Pick for likelihood. Generally pretty good for severity. This one tripped up quite a few people, and that's understandable. It's newly extracted out of likelihood for this methodology. But all I sort of want to just keep saying is this is numbers. Numbers. It's all about numbers. Number of pedestrians, number of cyclists, number of motorcycles, numbers, numbers, numbers. Okay. It'll probably become a little bit clearer as we go into the next module. But remember, when we were talking about this in module 1, where we talked about, completely eliminating the conflict with this mound of dirt from this level crossing and the road closed sign, that means that there's no number of vehicles going through here anymore. Zero number of vehicles. It's bringing that back to the numbers. And again here, we've eliminated the number of cyclists using the road and mixing with traffic. They've removed or minimized the number of conflicts there because they are separated. And when we get to starting to actually put some definitions, more rigid definitions to these things, we see exposure says, what are the number, and it does say for how long, but I'll talk a bit about that again, probably next session. We really don't in practice use for how long. So what are the numbers they're using road and thus exposure? That means AADT, side road volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists and pedestrians walking or crossing the road. Now, as we progress on to starting to refine our ability to actually put a score to these sort of things, we've discovered, and I just mentioned one then, that Austroads has done a really good job in creating this guidance, but there were some things that either in practice didn't work, or the jurisdictions have decided doesn't accurately represent things. And one of those was how long pedestrians are walking or vehicles are out there. It doesn't quite work in the way Austroads did it. So jurisdictions came up with their supplements, and Victorian government, South Australian government came up with supplements, and most jurisdictions, including New Zealand, tends to just follow those practices. With those supplements to the Austroads guidance on safe system assessments, we still identified a series of gaps in clarity. And people asking questions like, how do you score this? Or what is this exposure, likelihood, or severity? So there was not quite enough. So what we've done is tried to fill some of those gaps with these particular fact sheets as an interim until Austroads does another version of the assessment framework or the like. And so you see there's safe system scoring. They're all about scoring. How do you score things? So you may be utilizing these to help you along your journey. If you are looking at a cycling facility and going, it's a cycling lane. Is it going to influence likelihood, exposure, or severity? A cycling lane on road is a fairly easy one. We know that's likelihood. It's going to change the likelihood of crashes if the cyclist still exposed to the ability for that crash to easily happen. But what about if we put a concrete separator in between? Is that going to change exposure or likelihood or severity? And what about if we put a barrier between that, exposure, likelihood, or severity? So those sorts of things are worked through. Assessing long, complex projects is in there, and a few others. But yeah, those are in the learning management system available for you to look at as you go. And we may point you. So if you're into your safe system assessment and you start to have these questions, you may find something in these fact sheets, or you may email Kathy or myself and say, just unsure about whether this is a likelihood or severity factor for this cycle facility. We may send you the fact sheet and say, here's a fact sheet on that exact question. This module, though, is about connecting the one network framework or movement and place thinking with safe system thinking, and identifying characteristics of vulnerable road users, pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles, and categorizing key risk factors for vulnerable road users into those exposure, likelihood, and severity. So we'll start with this one network framework and movement and place thinking, which some of you are probably absolute experts on, and I'm excited for your input. Although for our purposes of undertaking safe system assessments, we don't need to be experts, and we don't need to be into the minute detail of this sort of strategic network planning style stuff. We need to, at a high level, sort of understand it. Why do we need to understand it? Well, it is certainly not because it's going to change the way we score and assess an existing road or a project. Okay? Because objectives and strategic plans and everything has nothing to do with what we are assessing. We are assessing what is going to happen, who's going to be exposed to crashes, what's the chance that they're going to crash, and how bad is it going to be, right? And that's just that. Where this comes into play in a super important manner in a safe system assessment is when we come to suggesting things to the project to better their alignment with safe system principles. We say, we like this idea, but it's only addressing the likelihood. We suggest you do this to address the severity. Well, we want to know that what we're suggesting aligns with their strategic objectives for the network and for that area, and for that road or street. And that's where we get ourselves a bit of understanding. So at a very high level, I'll talk about movement in place and one network framework. But essentially what we are recognizing these days is that roads and streets play more than just a movement function role. Okay, so that's to say that yes, maybe roads and streets were first built and invented to move people and goods. But now we're really recognizing that a lot of these areas hold a important place value. And place value, by that I mean it is a place for interaction, trade, socializing, mingling and the like. There are lots of reports on place metrics, and you can, do scoring of place value and those sorts of things. But those are essentially those sort of things. So what we see there, and New Zealand split it up by rural and urban, and made these different categories of roads to say that, well, we've got things with high place value and things with high movement value. And, if they have high both of those, they sort of sit in that category. Maybe if it's high just movement but very low place value into those interregional connectors. If you look in the urban areas, you can sort of see that with very low to no place value, we've got these transit corridors, and those can be your cycling superhighways. So, it could be a cycleway. It could be a motorway, because it's important that we think about movement of people and goods, not movement of cars necessarily. Okay, so sometimes people get tripped up and they immediately jump to motorways and only movement of cars in that movement scenario. But no, think about movement of people, goods in any form. Public transport, bikes, even walking fits within this movement corridor. Anyway, I won't delve into it in much more detail. We've got a snippet down here if you're interested. Get the PDF, click on the snippet, and you'll get a little bit more info. But let's look at these in a little bit more detail now. And what we'll do is a few little interactive exercises, because I want you to do something here. And what I want to do is start in this yellow sort of civic space area in the urban environment. And we saw the sort of these high place value, people recognizing it's got a very low movement requirement for one reason or another. Civic space. We saw a bit of an explosion of pop-up areas that were more recognized as civic spaces with practical urbanism, and COVID hit, and then everybody jumping on board this excitement, and that's great to see, because it's a real activation of a lot of these areas to recognize their place value and I suppose clearly say, well, it is civic space and we're able to do some of this stuff. But let's take this artistic impression and let's now spend a little bit of time, and I'll give you a few minutes to come up with ideas on what we could change to this area that would make it more of a civic space in terms of the movement and place categorization. What would make it more? What would increase its alignment with safe system principles? And I want you, for every time that you pop an idea in, to put either an E for exposure, an L, or an S in brackets after it. So you can propose a change here, and you do whatever you want that increases its civic spaceness, improves alignment with safe system principles, and then tell us how you've done that with whatever you've changed, and does that lever of getting better alignment with safe system principles come from exposure, likelihood, or severity? So free to pop a few in, and I'll give you 3 minutes to just pop a few ideas in. We'll do another one of these shortly, and I'll give you a longer time, and then you can have your stretch and fill your coffee up and your water we'll do that in about 10 minutes. So let's have a pause there and back in 3 minutes. Okay, so let's have a look here. So straight out of the gates, Rolly's gone, let's close the road to through vehicles exposure. And I'm going to give a prize straight away there. First one and a prize, because that is an absolutely fantastic thing to think about and to question immediately when something is in those civic space areas. Why do we have vehicles? We've recognized its low movement function. Getting vehicles through there is super low. Even getting cyclists through there is super low. Okay. Why can we not just close this off to traffic? Have it as a mall, just an area to congregate and make it a livable space. Great question. Great stuff. We then jumped into the idea, and it came up a few times here, of going and turning this into a one-way system. Okay, so that's a really interesting thought. And if we make this one way, the question becomes: are we going to influence exposure, likelihood, or severity? Well, without any information about how that's going to affect the number of vehicles and the number of cyclists and the number of motorcyclists through here, I would say you have to assume that it's going to influence just the likelihood of crashes. Now, the reason for that is to say, well, you'd assume that, if it goes one way, there'd be some other one way in the other direction, or the like, but we just don't know that. So what we then sort of find, if you assume that there would be a significant drop in traffic volume as a result of this one-way system, and you set exposure, that's fine, then that's correct. I do caution people, though, when you're doing real safe system assessments, not to make assumptions on exposure. Really try to get traffic modeling data, pedestrian prediction models, cyclist prediction model data, or something like that. Otherwise, we're just sort of guessing at it, really. But I can understand for this one, if you've said that, and as long as your thinking was traffic volume will be reduced, then you're right to go into exposure. But the reason I sort of say likelihood is that we know a one-way system is you've got less chance of having crashes due to just a simpler navigation of that for pedestrians crossing, for vehicles entering from side roads and the like. I just know where things are coming from. It's just a bit easier. So that's the likelihood factor. Would severity be altered? Well, severity, we've got to think about speed, we've got to think about angles. I'm not sure there's anything quite enough there to really give us anything meaty in terms of severity changes. Will was also in there on the idea of removing vehicles just a little bit after Rolly's super speed internet. So Rolly took the prize for that one. And then there's some really nice ideas, modal filters, so only letting certain vehicles in there. And again, that exposure, and that's right, we're influencing the number of vehicles going through there. Francis has come up with an idea of narrowing the road, widening the footpath. And I'm going to give a prize there, Kathy, because of the categorization to likelihood. That's correct. That one really often trips people up as well. People want to say, we've widened the footpath, we've narrowed the crossing space, thus they're exposed, the pedestrians are exposed less time crossing the road. Right? That in a safe system assessment, it's the number of pedestrians crossing, not the width that they're crossing, that we categorize into the exposure. So exactly as Francis has done here, it's a likelihood factor there. It's likely to crash. So that's a really good one, and it's a nice one, especially in terms of that civic space alignment. More areas for all of those things that we value in the place, in that place sense at a strategic planning level. Areas to congregate, to play, to have a coffee, to set up a coffee cart and a little whatever, seats, play areas, and the like. Removing parking is an interesting idea. Now, what will removing parking do? I saw it came up a couple of times there. Removing parking, well, yeah, just simply removing parking, say in this location, could potentially, well, you might get a reduction in the likelihood of crashes because some sight lines would be open up to people crossing in the line, and maybe some dooring things have reduced. But maybe you get a little bit of an increase in speed because it's a wider carriageway, it's still straight, and there's no, it doesn't feel narrower, so people might go faster. So we may see an increase in likelihood associated with that. And you notice there, I'm still talking all about likelihood here. It's all about likelihood. Parking removal, parking there, parking not. It's the chance of crash. Okay. If you're going to remove parking, keep your road narrow and utilize that area for something like widening the footpaths or dedicated cycling facilities or all these wonderful opportunities with that highly valuable car parking or bit of road space that you've now got back from that car park. So great idea. Now let's think about how we utilize that to ensure we haven't adjusted exposure likelihood and severity. Now I better be a bit quicker here. There's so many good ideas that have come in. I'm going to skip through a few. I'm going to see if I can find anything very out there different that I can talk to. Okay, a nice idea there of a shared zone, and shared zones very highly civic space aligned. Not as aligned as the idea of closing it off completely, but those shared zones, as many of you know, are whole areas where pedestrians have priority of crossing, of moving through the whole area, and cars are really the odd one out, and they must yield at all opportunities. And I do, in the road safety audit course, which some of you have done with me, we talk about shared zones a bit, and I always talk about the principle, this important principle of creating a shared zone is to make it not look like a road. So any driver coming into that area, just really sort of, you're driving, if they're driving it, they're like, am I even allowed to drive here? And that is a wonderful shared zone. And yeah, it's just well designed and well implemented shared zone if drivers are thinking that to themselves. Just flicking through here. Yep, some really good ideas.
Can lots of sorry, just like to jump in there. There are lots of things about furniture in there, but I like the comment here from Michael, which is lots and lots of furniture, so it feels like a living room where there's no running severity.
Oh yeah, it's nice.
You're making it like a shared zone, isn't it? So yeah.
Yes, well, that's right. If you like shared zone design is fun because you absolutely you completely throw out road design, and you start with like making it this. You can put furniture in all sorts of spots. You can. There's one I particularly like in a regional city in Victoria, which if you ever drive through them, which you usually don't because it's it's slow and it's annoying and everything like that, which is great. There's a win all around there. If you're driving in there, you're driving along really super slow. It's got cobblestones and all sorts of things, and then fountains start popping up in weird like jets of water. It's like, oh my god, should I? Well, I've got to get out of here. Yeah, it's good. It's good. So yeah, that's I like that. There was one. there's a number of people talking about traffic calming features, ways to reduce the speed. That's really good as well. If you are you've moved up, there is some movement requirement through an area, but you were trying to, hold on to as much of that civic space philosophy as possible. You really, you've got to slow those vehicles down, okay? And you've got to keep them really slow. And traffic calming features are great. Now, they are going to influence the likelihood and severity. The exposure is not going to be influenced unless, again, you've somehow got some modeling or some information that says, if you do traffic coming along here, it's going to reduce the traffic volume from 5,000 to 1,000 or something like that. Then you've got a number and you've got that ability to say exposure is down. I really keep harping on this because there is quite a bit of confusion out there from people starting out safe system assessments in what actually qualifies as exposure as compared to likelihood or severity. Safety cameras, interesting one. Yes, I get a good categorization there as a likelihood factor. There's less likely to see crashes. Now, as we see dedicated cycling facilities being put in there, you've really upped significantly the movement of the area. Like, it's becoming a movement corridor as you create these dedicated cycle facilities, or as you create dedicated crossing points. Now, that might sound interesting, but if you are saying pedestrian crossing, what you're saying there is that this is a road for moving vehicles through it, and pedestrians, you must cross at this spot only because that's for roads, that's for cars moving through, right? That is counter to a civic space philosophy. Pedestrians should be able to permeate and cross and interact and go through there in a very free-flowing manner, not, moved and pushed into these specific spaces. It's a very different area, and just wonderful stuff there. I'm gonna stop reading awesome comments, and I'm gonna just show up some artistic mock-ups. Okay, so maybe areas like this where we do see those, there is a bit of movement still assigned here, assuming some movement is required, but it's that shared zone style area. I don't think that this artistic impression should have a particular pedestrian crossing there. It should have been a shared zone as the whole thing. And these are really, it's got good civic space elements. You can see all of the excitement and the people having coffees and playing and trading and all of that wonderful stuff. Great livability, great civic space. Got little bit of movement through there, yeah, some good stuff. As the movement requirement rises, okay, you're still grasping onto that little bit of civic spaceness, trying to say, oh no, we're still civic space. This is where we start to introduce, as some of you said, the idea of these bike lanes, bus lanes, dedicated areas for vehicles. We're still trying to maintain as much of that civic space as possible, and that's then as crossings come in. But you're really starting to push outside of civic space territory with this. I mean, in practical reality, this is probably how you transition these areas, or potentially. It's a bit to that. Okay, I'll jump through this one quite quickly. Local streets. What we know with local streets is we're down at low place and low movement. Okay, so the residents don't like it when we tell them that their local street has low place value, but it's that societal whole of place value, different metrics that are used. But anyway, these areas with that low place value, but the low movement function gives us the opportunity to significantly bring down speeds. Okay, if we talk to the strategic plans and our safe system assessment, and they say, yeah, we've categorized it as local streets. It's an M5 in movement for vehicles and for cyclists as well and the like. We go beauty. Because when we get to making recommendations, we can really pull speeds down significantly because they've actually actively told us we do not want people driving through here fast. We don't want people using this as a run through. That's not part of our strategic objective of this area, and our ability to align highly with safe system principles is great because we know speed's so critical to safe system. If they'd said to us it was a really super high movement, then we might be in a bit of a challenge. But it's kind of got us into an easy space there, and so this one's probably got far more face value than that. But you're seeing similar stuff to the last one where we're able to blanket speeds down. We can, by the nature of it, give it more place value because we've done some of this stuff. But anyway, some just sort of mock-ups, and you get the idea. But let's do a little more challenging one, and this is where we'll take that bit of time to have the stretch and the fill up of the coffee, the third coffee for the day, and we're going to go into this very prickly, challenging area of city hubs. And why is it challenging? It's because we've got high place value, but we've got high movement requirements as well. And movement could be vehicles, cyclists, public transport, but we're trying to move stuff through there, but we're also trying to, have this really good high place value. So this is the artistic mock-up we're going to use for the next 5 minutes for you to, 5 or 6 minutes, or 5 minutes after I stop talking. And you can see here that it's a high speed road. We do have pedestrians, we have cyclists, we have like this pedestrian overpass, we've got pedestrian fencing in the middle of the road as well. But what we're aspiring to, our strategic planners have said, with this road we aim to do upgrades to, and we want it to be in this category of city hubs, right? So we want high place value here. It's we want to make an important place for community, as well as have movement function for cyclists, for cars, for freight, for public transport, and for people to be able to walk through the area, as well as all of that place value stuff. So very challenging territory, but same little exercise. Pop in some ideas on alterations to these area to give us higher place value, higher alignment with safe system principles, and movement for all of those road users. So you've got 5 minutes from now. So seeing some great stuff coming in again. Well done. Let's work our way through and we'll see what we've got here. So first of all, we've got people talking about dropping the speed, getting speeds down of vehicles, and that's certainly going to improve the alignment with safe system principles due to reduction in severity of crashes, but also likelihood of crashes. So if you can get speeds down, you reduce both likelihood and severity of crashes. There's less chance of a crash because there's more time to evade and react, and less severity. And it also does align with these the place value we're trying to achieve. You get better place value with that lower speed. Then there's some discussion around dedicated facilities, dedicated busways, dedicated cycleways, and you do find that those do align quite well in these categories due to the fact that you are trying to create that movement ability. So you are starting to try and find that separation of mode. So overpasses and underpasses for pedestrians and cyclists are an interesting one. They, in a sort of very, I suppose, simplistic form, are not great at place value making. what they do is they really create more, they're more aligned with heavy movement corridors because you're basically getting those and confining those pedestrians and cyclists. But if they're designed well and they can have some of those livability elements integrated into them, they can be good. But we are under those situations addressing exposure to crashes. Lots of people looking at all of that available road space and thinking it could be used a bit better in terms of, yes, either different lanes for bikes, lanes for transport, or eating into some of that with some bigger footpaths areas for some of that place value. And so that's all good stuff. Just having a look here. It's good stuff. Yep, so there's a good little bit of discussion going on in there as well. I think that I've sort of covered most of the stuff happening in there, and I am liking the exposure, likelihood, and severity categorization. I think people are getting that well. I think people are generally got a good feel for the fact that movement is not just about movement of cars. It can be about movement of all sorts of travel modes and how we create those livable spaces, those places. So let's have a look at artistic impression again. Always take artistic impressions with a bit of a grain of salt, but we see there, yeah, you've got good movement function, especially there for bikes. Pedestrians have good movement ability through the area, public transport. You know, cars, you're not going to get as many cars through there, all right? But you'll get as many people easily. You know, it all sort of has many spin-off benefits, but from a safe system perspective and a road safety perspective, we're going to see a super highly aligned safe system area here because of speeds of vehicles, because of that separation, because of low likelihood, but also low severity of crash. Just lots of good stuff all around. And it's still retaining some nice place value, plenty of area for that social interaction, trade, and the like. Now, you know, artistic impressions are one thing, and sort of seeing them integrate into our cities is nice. And we start to see some of these areas like Christchurch here as an example. We're starting to see some of that filtering in and this more place value, but movement of all vehicles coming through. And there's some good examples around New Zealand. I just picked a random one here. And we'll see it filter in sort of in phases rather than that nice instantaneous change we saw in the artistic impressions. When we are in these urban connectors, these are the ones where we're saying, well, place value's down, okay? We're down on place value. We're not saying that we want really people to have that interaction, the trade, the special areas in these areas. We're really about moving traffic through here. And that could be traffic, cyclists, cars, trucks, whatever it is. But these are the areas where you do have the ability, or it's more encouraged or expected, acceptable to do things like pedestrian fencing, like overpasses for pedestrians or underpasses, and these sorts of features. Certainly, if you've identified cyclists as one of your movement modes you're wanting in here, maybe get complete cycle lanes, and that is also very good stuff, or the like. But even with these, remember at those conflict points, we want to ensure that we're getting vehicle-to-vehicle interactions or vehicle-to-pedestrian interactions within our tolerable safe system levels through raising intersections, slowing vehicles down at these particular points. Which brings us nicely on to talking about cyclists and pedestrians in particular and their sort of vulnerability and impact. But we know they are the most vulnerable road users, and we see 10% risk around the 20 km/h impact, almost certain death around the 50. Generally, that 30 km/h is seen as a point where we want to keep things below. It doesn't necessarily mean 30 km/h speed limits, but that's certainly something that's coming along quite well. But operating speeds, there or below, and especially thinking about those conflict areas. And old and young even more vulnerable. But really trying to manage those speeds, 30 km/h or below, down around 20, where we've got that sort of interaction happening. Any questions or comments I should be dealing with there, Kathy, at this stage, or I'll just keep pressing along?
Yeah, we've got Ben's popped in another Christchurch example. Did you want me to take over for a minute?
Okay.
This one here.
Yeah. What do we got?
Oh,
there it changed.
That's an instant real life artistic impression that just.
Yeah. Oh yeah, look at the. That's an interesting one with the bins. I had that challenge a few times with designing separated facilities and how to deal with bins. That's interesting. Anyway. Oh wow, yeah, okay, cool. Look at that.
But if you go forward, oh wow.
And look at the cycle. Wow, that's cool.
But then there it's gone.
Yeah. What a transformation of an area. Cool.
Sorry, you can take it back now.
That's good, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Can I take it back? Yes, I can. Okay. I talked briefly when I was showing those scoring fact sheets about some of the challenges of deciding whether cycling facilities are exposure or likelihood reduces, and separated facilities like this become a bit of a challenge in that perspective, because you are sort of eliminating exposure to a lot of the crashes, but there may still be some of the crashes still there associated with side roads and vehicles turning in and out of access points and those sort of things. So there's a little bit of judgment required. I just remind you there's a fact sheet available to help you try to determine that as you go. When we're dealing with cyclists and pedestrians at intersections, we've got quite a few options available to us. But where we talked in module 2 about how good roundabouts are for that vehicle-to-vehicle interaction and the conflict angles and the increased driver alertness and all of those good aspects of those. But there's some challenges associated with roundabouts and cyclists in particular. Pedestrians, the research isn't really there showing it as a major road safety issue. There's certainly a lot of access issues, and people don't like them and hard to cross, and especially elderly really just can't cross often. So there's lots of issues. So these sorts of protected roundabouts, as they're called, are becoming really what we know as super high alignment with safe system principles and catering for a lot of that, where you provide those circulating carriageways for vehicles, but also then outside that for cyclists and pedestrians. And I'm sure some of you have seen this sort of stuff happening. Here's an actual one built. which was that mock-up that you just saw in the last slide. But proving really good in terms of reducing the likelihood of crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists and the severity of crashes as well. So certainly worthwhile having a good look at. And we can send you lots more details on these if you're interested. Send you some footage of riding through it. We spent a lot of time in our cycling infrastructure course, which is an online course like this one, analysing the particulars of design and of these sorts of facilities, and giving you 360-degree ride-through footage that you can tend to be on the bike and then ride through. Sort of good stuff. But yeah, we're happy to provide some of that for anybody who's interested. It's the principle is still sort of good even in larger roundabouts, and this has been generally problematic. I mean, we mock-ups and ideas here of cycle facilities where you have cyclists away from the circulating traffic in the roundabout, crossing potentially more minor legs with priority at grade, and then in here, and then either going under as a grade separation. I mean, the Dutch would always go under in these sort of situations, but maybe if we don't have the resources to do that, what we're trying to do is reduce the likelihood of crash as much as possible. So good crossing angles, good sight lines, clearly understanding what vehicles will do and giving the best opportunity there. Severity of crash at these locations may be down due to the fact that we've slowed vehicles in here, but it may still be above our 30 km/h sort of threshold speeds that we're trying to get. So, it's not the ideal outcome. It's not too bad. I mean, it's a very tangential roundabout for those who do it, sort of, and a more radial roundabout would certainly potentially get speeds down further, but that's all in the details of the design and the like, and we won't get into that. No, just a little adapted diagram from a Dutch diagram, sort of that 0 to 30 is theoretically ability to share lanes and have the vehicles and bikes interacting. It's probably a little bit, the 30 is really upper limits, and you're talking about commuter cyclists and the like, that are really going to be doing that. If you've got, if you're trying to encourage kids and others to ride, to fight it out with the four-wheel drives and the like in a lane share scenario is a bit ambitious. In these 30 to 70 kilometre, we want physical separation with curbing and physical separators like we just saw in that Christchurch one, and you can utilise your parking setting out as well. And then when we're in those really high-speed environments, fully separated facilities, there's very low safe system alignment if you are to mix vehicles and vulnerable road users with, even sealed shoulders and expecting that to be enough, because we know that the likelihood's down because there's a sealed shoulder a little bit, but the severity is just way too extreme, and the likelihood actually is, while it's down a little bit, it's still up quite high of people drifted off their lane into the shoulder and the like. I'll do a couple of slides on pedestrians and then jump into motorcycles. I'll pause at the end of pedestrians, see if there's any questions, and hopefully we'll give you even 10 minutes or so at the end of this session to do the quiz and make sure you've got that assignment in, because after next session you've got another big assignment being the safe system assessment. So pedestrians, we know, slowing speeds down is critical, but we know the pedestrian crossing points that we often make. If we have at-grade pedestrian crossings with pedestrian priority, so zebra crossings, so pedestrian priority crossing, zebra crossing, at grade, so no raised features at all, we know that either does not improve road safety or actually goes the other way, makes it worse in most scenarios. And it's because we've got vehicles still coming in at whatever speed they are, and we've got pedestrians who are crossing with priority and not really looking and expecting vehicles to stop. A minute it's raised like this one, we know that it significantly reduces the chance and the severity of crashes. So big ticks in likelihood and severity. And this is a New Zealand example. I understand red is not the flavour of them anymore. You don't do red, but yeah, putting that aside. So I have a sort of rule of thumb. My general rule is if we have an area we've decided is there's enough pedestrian activity to warrant pedestrian priority, or we want that, or we're encouraging that, it should be a raised crossing, or it should have speed calming measures on the approach to ensure vehicle speeds are down around that 20 km/h mark at that crossing point. So to me, no excuses really. So people say, oh, but it's a freight route. Say, okay, well, almost even more reason to slow vehicles down. Buses, or these sorts of things are concerns, but we can do things like speed cushions on the approach, so a larger vehicle can straddle that, straddle the cushion if needed. That's an option. But really, ramp grades and things like that completely acceptable for buses, for heavy vehicles, for motorcyclists, and the like. So, and there's lots of examples. You actually, apart from just all the wonderful road safety benefits, you have super high access benefits, equity benefits, mobility benefits, encouragement of sustainable transport benefits. The list goes on. It's wonderful. In fact, we are working with a variety of people on a dedicated training course to raised crossings because we love them so much. That'll be released shortly, and we'll let you all know if you've got people interested in that particular element.
Ken, we do love them, but question for you. Surely freight routes and high pedestrian demand don't mix?
Yeah, well, that's right. At a strategic planning level, it shouldn't be happening. Okay? And so if you get your strategic planning right, your planning right all together, they don't mix. However, as we have an existing network and it exists with lots of flaws in the strategic planning of it because it evolved over time, we do find areas where that is the current case, and you try to work at a planning level to eliminate it, but there's often times when you're just stuck with trying to somehow manage all of this chaos. But I fundamentally agree with that comment.
Thank you.
I use this little analogy to show that I actually think we've known for many, many, many decades what a safe system is for vulnerable road users. And this is an example quite a while back in Adelaide, and it is an area where we've got a couple of workers down in working in this sort of general area. They're doing electrical works in the islands there and the like. And this is a 60 km/h road, but because it's at the time it was, because there's workers in the area, it went down to 25 km/h, which is the South Australian work zone speed limit, which is, I haven't seen others use 25. Most seem to use 40, but anyway, these are 25. The 25 km/h went down to that. The barriers were put in place for that, creating that separation there. And they do their work a couple of weeks, and all the barriers are removed, and the speed goes up to 60 km/h again, and then about 3,000 pedestrians a day cross here and here and here, cross. So it's exactly the same vulnerability of user, isn't it? The worker, the pedestrian, crossing, and they're all the same vulnerability. It's just we look at one that we want to protect and keep safe, and the other we lump all of that responsibility onto them as an individual. And people often say, "Oh, but the workers are sort of concentrating on their work and they're not looking at traffic." And I say, well, the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone and listening to their music and intoxicated and you name it. But you know, it's safe system sort of fundamentals of just saying, well, they should behave, and that's not what we're trying to create that system around them. So yeah, just an example there of what it is. And I often talk about an elevator pitch for a safe system and just really saying, you know, how we think about the safety of workers around the road. Well, if we can just afford that level of safety thinking for the general public and the general travelling public, we're pretty close to a safe system. But there's lots of wonderful things, and I mean, raised intersection. I keep banging on about raised intersections, but they just tick so many of the boxes there in likelihood and severity, and really effective. And so those are generally good. Little design specifics, and I like to point this one out because I think they've done a good job here with some bollards here in order to. You just got to, because you've removed any physical curbing, you've got ability for vehicles or the swept path of vehicles to track into pedestrian areas. So just thinking about some of that separation, it's a good one. Raised crossings again on thresholds and areas like this. So and it's nice to often give a prop area there about 5 meters to for a vehicle to sort of prop as it's turned 5-6 meters. So yeah, they can. Yeah, that's what it is. In terms of speed limit reductions, this is when the default speed limit went from 60 to 50 kilometers per hour. And you can see the drop there just with that change in default speed limit in urban areas. And it's pretty impressive to show that. And there's a lot going on in the speed management space in New Zealand. Okay, Kathy, before I jump into motorcyclists, anything I have to deal with?
Yeah, just a couple of slides back, the cafe scene. If a driver makes a mistake there, that may cause some severe damage to someone at the cafe. There we go. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, I do agree. You got potential for you if you can get speeds, or if operating speeds are low, you can do some bollard treatments and bits and pieces. But you know, if you're going to have this sort of area of high place value, you're trying to obviously create high place value here. You know, speed calming measures on the through road as well, absolutely, to keep speeds down, to try to, you know, absolutely lessen the likelihood of run-off road crash as well. Okay. I'll be fairly quick through motorcyclists, as I say, to try and give you 10 minutes to finish off a few lingering things and your quiz. So I like to think of the 5 S's of motorcycle safety, which I've talked to some of you about in different things in the past. The ability to see a motorcyclist and the ability for a motorcyclist to see what's ahead, the sight, the surfaces provided, the signs to warn, inform, guide. Then what happens when a motorcyclist crashes, and what are they striking, or what is striking them? And then the speeds that all of this happens at. And if we sort of look through those 5 S's, we see that all this sight stuff and the surface stuff and the sign stuff are likelihood influences. The strike is when we've got the crash happening, and what is being hit is the severity aspect. And speed, as I keep talking about, both likelihood and severity. Now, there's been some recent research into biomechanics of injury in motorcyclists. A colleague of ours, Ewan Strandroth, he's published some work with some others around this, and pretty interesting stuff. But what we've sort of discovered is that motorcyclists do sort of sit between cyclists and pedestrians and passenger vehicles in terms of their biomechanics of injury. So even with helmet, the best safety gear on, a motorcyclist is nowhere near as protected as being in a passenger vehicle, a person in a passenger vehicle with extra crumple zones and airbags and seatbelts and the like. But they're a bit more than a cyclist or a pedestrian. I put those in for your reference. But just some simple things around these sight perspective. Motorcyclists are hidden, they're smaller, they're hidden behind things like this tree there, for example. So as we do our safe system assessments and we're forced to consider and analyze and score likelihood and exposure and severity for motorcyclists, we're thinking about things that block sight lines at intersections, smaller objects, signal controller boxes, trees, and the like. When we think about the surfaces we provide, motorcycles are highly susceptible to surface irregularities due to the fact that they turn, they take curves or corners on a lean like this and have small contact patches. And so, if that slips out, center of gravity, they're down. So the surface becomes this really important spot for motorcyclists who are referred to as the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface issues. And we think about that, not just with the vision of potholes and shoves and ruts and bleeding pavement and all those sorts of things, but also in terms of things we're introducing in there, like steel plates, pit lids, and the like, and the fact they could be slippery when it's a bit wet. Riders may not see it because they're following behind other vehicles or a truck or something like that. So, or it's at night. So these are increasing the likelihood of crashes, the chance motorcyclists will crash. The signs are really, motorcyclists are highly attuned to signage as reducing their likelihood of crashes and taking warning, getting information, and understanding that. So we can be putting some things up that can really influence the likelihood of crashes utilizing signs. And there are particular ones you can use to talk to motorcyclists in particular to reduce their chance of crash. These ones to say, hey, there's an issue coming up that is particularly going to be an issue for a motorcyclist, may not be as much of an issue, or an issue at all for other road users. And strike. When we're thinking about that biomechanics of injury for motorcyclists as they hit things, and what forces can we handle, and how can we manage energy of a rider to within what we see as tolerable levels? Now, I've got this little video here of a crash test for barrier systems in this case. There's a European crash test protocol for motorcycles and barriers. So this is this crash test protocol. The first one you'll see is a motorcycle crash test dummy directly into a post, and the crash happens 25-degree angle at 60 kilometers per hour. Okay, so you'll be able to see the damage done to the dummy there. It is unsurvivable. The addition of underrun protection, what it does is it absorbs some of the energy, but it also means that there's not that instantaneous stop and that the energy is dissipated over time. So we're seeing again that benefit for the rider, and that at the 60 kilometer per hour crash in those angles brings things to within survivable levels for motorcycles. It's not going to be friendly, but it's going to be within tolerable levels. levels and less than what should be sort of level 3 serious injury. So they should be able to recover and lead a more healthy life. So it gives us hope that, you know, there are severity things we can do for motorcycle safety with this sort of thinking. So that's barriers, but we can start to do that thinking around poles, where we can create slip-based frangible poles for motorcyclists. You know, what are the energies and the tolerable limits you need to make on that? Certainly a normal galvanized steel pole, it's holding up a sign, a street sign or the like, that is not frangible for a motorcycle. It's frangible for a car, it'll break away with a car hits, but not a motorcycle. So we've got a lot of specific roadside hazards out there for motorcyclists. Then there's all the trees and the rocks and the culverts and the, you know, all sorts of stuff. So just something for us to, you know, consider. I suppose before I jump into speed, I will quickly mention wire rope safety barriers. New Zealand has a wonderful fact sheet on motorcycles and wire rope safety barriers and dispelling a whole lot of myths out there. But just a couple of quick things on that. It comes up as an issue a lot by the motorcycle community, different segments of the motorcycle community thinking it's a particularly bad thing for motorcyclists, being, you know, it's termed the cheese cutter and all these sorts of things. But the reality is it just doesn't play out. The reason it doesn't play out is because wire rope safety barrier is generally used on long straight sections with slight curves, but you can't use wire rope safety barrier systems on very windy roads, like very popular motorcycle touring routes. I don't like the Coromandel or the like, because a wire rope safety barrier system, if we look down on this, and if it was a wire rope safety barrier system we're looking down on, it's a barrier in tension. So we tension it up at each end here. Tension, 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 tension. And what will happen to that is that it'll just pop into, you know, it actually just pulls your posts over, and then eventually will sort of go in the middle of the road. I've exaggerated that, but that's the thing. So we're not using wire rope safety barrier where there's the most risk for motorcyclists, which are these curves, because motorcyclists don't tend to fall asleep on the bike the way vehicle drivers do and drift off and then recorrect and go running off the road on straights as they do. So really, the fact is we don't use it where motorcyclists are at highest risk. Where the motorcycle community probably has some good points is that there's not great things to then deal with the energy of crashes when motorcyclists hit. If a motorcyclist was to hit this barrier system, it's just not. We don't have the underrun protection style stuff, and there's it's a bit problematic. But the reality is that none of the, you know, multinational barrier companies are really investing heavily in looking for that, because there's not a market there. Because if anybody is concerned enough about motorcycle risk, they don't use this barrier system. They use a flexible W-beam system with underrun protection. A bit more. I could talk a lot about it, but I'm just going to stop myself now. Speed. Speed can be managed through advisory speeds, regulatory speeds, through local area traffic management, through all those other features we've talked about throughout this course. And they're all beneficial for motorcyclists, and they're going to address the likelihood and severity of crash. I don't get concerned if motorcyclists are following the advisory or not, as long as your advisory speeds are consistent throughout the route and the curves, that it's it's almost a sign of what's to come, not necessarily that is exactly what you should stick at, and that's all about reducing the likelihood of crashes. Kathy, questions or anything else to cover, or did you want to show anything?
Yes, I do actually, but there was an earlier question about when you talked about raised crossings. What is the ramp grade preference for a raised table zebra crossing? 1 in 10 or 1 in 15? We're getting into specifics, aren't we?
Yeah, there's quite there's some specifics around that. I'll send out. We did a safe system snippet on that, and it's all about sort of what speeds you're particularly aiming at, and then your vehicle usage and a whole lot of other things. But you can do longer ramp grades, higher ramps, and alter your ramp grade accordingly. So perhaps we can just link to that snippet somehow.
Yeah, I can do that. Now tell me what's going on here.
Why are you dragging out old photos of me flexing guideposts? There was a time when guideposts used to be a motorcycle specific hazard, and this was I can't even remember where I was, but we were just auditing the number of guideposts that were flexible versus the number that were motorcycle specific hazards. Look at how much hair I had.
I know, right? Yeah.
And no moustache. Okay, enough old photos of Ken. Where are you getting this stuff?
I have my sources. You've got to watch out. Okay, so we're in module 3, and we have, what do we have? We have the module 3 quiz here, and I was also going to show you just quickly. I can't get my thing to move. Sorry. Oh, it's all a mess. Now look at that. I spent too much time on the funny photo instead. No, that's not it either. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Oh. Okay, there's some comments in there from Bianca.
Oh, cool. I'll have a look
So why don't you have a look at that, and then I'll find the bit that I was trying to find. Can you say?
Yeah, so it's a really good point in Bianca's making around the fact that if there wasn't the barrier system or something there, what is behind that is also going to be a significant hazard for motorcyclists as well. So you do need to, I suppose, have a think about that. I did a series of making roads motorcycle friendly. This is road design, management, operation, maintenance of roads for motorcycle safety around New Zealand. It was a great week, darting around running that session. And they're such an interesting road user in the sense that they're definitely a legitimate road user, but then our planning and decision making and the like is very rarely takes into account motorcyclists. So I think we're at quite there's a specific term for that, in the fact that they don't quite fit into any of the available categories of thinking in transport planning. I can't remember what it is. How'd you go, Kathy?
Yeah, getting there. Thank you, Ken. Okay, so what I wanted to very quickly do is just show you where the feedback is.
Yep.
So I have logged in as myself again. Okay, never mind. Anyway, if you jump into your assignment and you scroll down, that's where you get the feedback comments from you. So it's just a matter of keep scrolling down.
So you click back into your assignment, and then
you click back into your assignment, and you scroll down. So we do have a quiz for module 3 today. That's all we've got for today. And if you haven't, if you're one of the very few people, there's only a handful of people that haven't done their module 2 assignment, do jump in and do that one so that you get some feedback before next session. Because in the next session, we're going to assign you a site, and I want you to have a little sneak peek at this one to make sure we've got you a site that's somewhere near your home. So in module 4, we've got complete your safe system assessment. And in there, what you'll find is there's a site for everyone, hopefully, and your name is at the end of it. Now, some sites will have more than one person's name. This one here's snacking up the top, which just means that someone has an address that's nearby to the address that you've provided. Now, if for some reason you have moved between signing up for the course and now, or you're no longer in that location, you can't get to this site sometime in the next week or two, then do get in touch with me and let me know, and we'll find you a new site. If you find another site in this list and you go, I'd rather do that one, then also you can do that as well. Just get in touch with me and let me know. But we just want to make sure everyone has a site that they can get to in the next week and a bit. So you will actually need to go physically and visit this site. This is where you need your high-vis vest. But Ken will run through this in our next session on Friday morning. So for the time being, just check that, yes, this is somewhere you can get to, if that makes sense. So that's in the module 4 bit, and look for your name in there.
Thanks, Kathy.
Questions?
I think everybody's good. All right.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, see you on Friday.
Bye.